What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Go Lead Everything podcast. I'm your host, Phil Swanson, and today I have the Calgarian compadre from TC Energy, my colleague, John McDonald. How are you doing, John?
Doing great, Phil. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Really
man.
excited to be on here today. I've been following you on LinkedIn,
Oh,
and
yeah?
seeing some of these podcasts, and the work that you're doing is pretty phenomenal.
Well, thank you, sir. I'm thrilled that you could be on the show today, and that's what this show's all about, is really highlighting some of those great leaders that are impacting people day to day in their own circles and taking all the good work they're doing and letting others in a broader audience be able to hear it. So really excited to have you on, and wanted to give you an opportunity to tell a little bit about your story. Obviously, we met at TC. We started around the same time. We were in the EIT engineering training program, and you're up in Calgary, been in Calgary for a while. Tell a little bit about your story and just kind of your journey to TC Energy and engineering.
Sure. Well, engineering wasn't really my first choice. I had a decision to make back in high school. I don't know if you had teachers that were saying, what does your career planning look like? Answer 50 questions, and then this is the bucket that you're going to fit into. So on one side I had management, and on the other side I had engineering as a choice. So I put down both, you know, in my application to the university, and then engineering ended up being the first to say, hey, you've been accepted. But that being said, I'd have an engineering mind. When I was a kid, I was always opening stuff up, trying to figure out how things would work. My dad said, if the batteries are missing, it's probably because John was into it. And funny enough, I ended up going into the discipline of electrical engineering. So yeah, I think I've got a curious mind. I want to know how things tick. I'm very interested in how people tick too. And I think that's one thing that can really strengthen relationships, is understanding how other people work, not just how the physical sciences work and how it can be applied, but how do we interface with other people? How do we invoke empathy? How do we understand how people tick, so we can all work together and solve complex problems?
I think it's funny, man. Engineers definitely have the stereotype of not being able to interact well and communicate well, and kind of they have the stereotype of being that introverted, not really emotionally intelligent sort of types, and you're definitely not that. And I think that's one of the things that makes you a great leader, is your emotional intelligence. And I'm really curious too, because I'm always fascinated by people and how they chose engineering. When I was thinking about it, my dad was a civil engineer, worked in energy. My older brother was a civil engineer, worked in energy. And look, what do you know? Phil's a civil engineer. And I actually chose civil because I considered it the easiest of the real engineering disciplines, one step up from industrial, I suppose. But and that's really interesting. And I know you're pretty involved up with the Professional Engineering Association in Canada, are you not?
I go to a lot of the sessions and conferences that they have. So I practice in the province of Alberta. So it's the Association of Professional Engineers and Geoscientists Alberta, and very very active in giving feedback as a member of the profession, and wanting to make sure that how self-regulation is managed. It's managed by individual engineers, and how do we make that profession better? So I've sought to sit on some committees, and hopefully that's going to pan out, and I can provide some of my background and expertise to make the profession better. I think at its core, as engineers that provide good sound designs for use in the public space, these are things that are useful to society. Going back to what we do at TC Energy, we provide the energy that people need every single day. And there's a lot that goes on in the background to make that happen. the house that I'm sitting in right now, it's heated by natural gas. It's close to freezing right now in Alberta. And
Yeah, it's the same here in Houston.
So, the fact that I've got creature comforts in my house it's because that there's natural gas coming to my house. And how do you do that? You've got a vast, intricate system of pipelines to make sure that producers that are creating or pulling natural gas from wells are delivering it to customers, and that contributes to our quality of life. We get to cook with that natural gas. We get to warm our houses with it. This is where families raise their children, and we rely on that natural gas. It's used to generate electricity. So the light bulb that I turn on every single morning to be able to see, to brush my teeth. These are things we don't think about, and we rely on them. And engineers have a huge part to play to make sure that gets delivered every single day, and that reliability is there.
Yeah, it's fascinating, man. And even as an engineer, sometimes I'll just drive around Houston and I look at the infrastructure of all the energy plants. I look at the road systems. You just think about the man hours, the countless man hours in not only engineering, but in construction to actually make all that stuff happen is absolutely incredible. And I think it's really easy to get kind of short-sighted in your thinking and not see that, I don't have natural gas heat in my house. I have electricity. Yeah. Well, where'd that electricity come from? It's fascinating. What do you think about the energy transition? I know we're in a time and here in Houston, TC is part of the Greater Houston Partnership, and they're talking about Houston being a leader in the energy transition. What are your thoughts on the energy transition and energy outlook for the next few decades?
Well, I think that's an important question. I think it's an important question that everyone's thinking about, and has an opinion. I think that the one thing that we need to focus on is what does society need? What do we need to have a stable society, a society that enjoys the comforts that we have in our houses, and what's actually financially viable for those families to live with those creature comforts. So we're talking about a transition. I think what you're referring to is a transition to renewables. Can that happen overnight? I don't think so. There's a high dependence on natural gas and oil. But at the same time, we have a responsibility to make sure that we're using those resources in the most efficient ways possible. And there's a lot of technology innovations out there to make that happen. And so, I think that natural gas and oil has a huge role to play in the quality of life we experience, not only in North America but all over the world. It's pulling countries out of poverty because you're able to use that energy density and bring that quality of life to third world countries. So there is a transition to renewables, and natural gas and oil has a part to play in that transition.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's a supply demand question, and like you said, what does the market really need, and how do we not only provide the energy that people that have access to energy today need, but also the energy that the billions of people today that don't have access to energy need, while figuring out those fit for purpose solutions for renewables where their place is. I totally agree. I think it's going to be a mix for sure. Thinking more, John, about leadership in general. Obviously, this is the Go Lead Everything podcast. I want to hear kind of your thoughts just at a high level on leadership and what leadership means to you, not only in your role at TC, but maybe in your personal life as well.
Sure. And that's another excellent question. You ask that to any single leader that you tag as a leader, and they're going to have a different opinion, a different perspective on what leadership is. My focus is really on understanding what makes people tick, and understanding playing to people's strengths, understanding their weaknesses, and seeking to improve and find the best potential in everyone. I've had some really excellent mentors throughout high school through university, at TC Energy, people even in my volunteer experiences outside of work. All these people have something to offer that really helps develop me as an individual to become a better person. Whether that might be becoming more efficient at work and more effective, or growing in my personal life, and just could be time management, could be we're both men of faith, so there's people in our lives that impact virtue and how we grow in that. So I go back to how are we as leaders watching out for everyone else, and how are we developing people around us? We've been gifted with observing excellent methods and approaches from other people that we pick up, and we read about, we observe, and we execute them ourselves to try and solve social issues or relationship issues. How are we sharing that knowledge with other people? So I would say leadership is really knowing how to develop those around you, and striving towards that. And you're not going to be perfect at it, and I don't think you'll ever be perfect at it, but trying to make sure that you're rising up or developing people around you, and not just focusing on yourself.
I totally agree. And I was talking with Heather Parody the other day on the podcast. She's the host of the Unconventional Leaders podcast. We talked a little bit about family and how, I know you're a father and a family man. And to me, that, speaking to our faith background, that fatherhood piece is really such a huge aspect of leadership. It's train up a child in the way he should go. And when he's old, he won't depart from it, he or she. And, I just think that's really what leaders do. It's all about, helping people and building up people to head in the way they need to go, and almost giving them a vision for a better version of themselves. Really curious. What's up?
I'd agree with that. I think, part and parcel is, how are we behaving in, almost all situations. There really isn't a time frame where, you should really break from yourself or your character and what you hold in your convictions. Because, people observe that, and, they'll be influenced either negatively or positively. So, talking about, leading your family, being a good example for your kids. Maybe there's disagreements you have with your wife. Maybe it's not the right time to have that with your kids, because, they don't need to be, hearing about disagreements. And that there's a certain time and place for that. You mentioned about, giving constructive feedback to people in one of your posts, setting aside any constructive feedback as, one-on-one rather than a large group. There's a lot of prudence in, when you say things or how you approach certain situations, and how you're acting with other folks, because it can positively or negatively impact relationships.
Yeah, I think taking great care with how you communicate, when you communicate, timing plays a huge piece. I totally agree with you. I'm curious, speaking of timing, I think about the Canadian culture versus our culture here in the US, and I have my perspective on it. And personally, I love the Canadian culture. Talk a little bit about the differences in US versus Canadian culture from the Canadian perspective.
I would say that Canadians like to find consensus, if that makes sense, before moving forward on any sort of decision. And then on the American side, you don't necessarily need consensus. If something makes sense, if you've convinced someone that this is the right thing to do, they may not need consensus with other people, but they'll just go after it. They'll say, you know what, this makes sense. We'll go and do it. So, I think there's there's strengths and weaknesses to both approaches, especially in large organizations. And that would probably be my observation is consensus versus taking the bull by the horns would be the metaphor I would have for what I've seen from my American counterparts. And I admire that. If you have conviction in something and you believe in it, just go for it.
Yeah, I think you're right that there's and I refer to it as a friendliness. There's a patience and friendliness in the Canadian culture that I don't think there's necessarily a lack of friendliness or patience on the American side, but the European sort of culture, the Canadian culture, which has its European roots. I mean, I guess we all do have our European roots, but really think there is a sort of a friendliness and a patience to the Canadian culture that I think it's a good thing in most instances. But I do think there is that time to grab the bull by the horns and move too. So like you said, they both have their advantages, and I think it's timing. I think there's a place to get consensus, and I think there's a place to move and maybe not take the time to get consensus. So it's all about that timing for sure.
Yeah.
What's the best place you've ever traveled?
The best place I've ever traveled. I wasn't ready. Not really ready for that question.
I switched it up on you.
One of the most beautiful places I've ever been to is actually St. John's, Newfoundland. I was there for a week for an engineering conference when I was in university, and I was in there in the dead of winter. It was January. It was cold, but St. John's, Newfoundland is just a beautiful little East Coast town. Very friendly people. And it was picture perfect. All these little small houses along the shore or along in downtown with different colors, and just it's got this East Coast feel to it. That's probably one of the most beautiful places in the winter that I've ever been to. So yeah, that would be high on my list of one of the best places I've been to.
Super cool. Yeah. We my wife and I went to Santorini, Greece, which traveling out of North America for the first time was really eye-opening, especially to Europe and seeing all these things that have so much history. And I really think traveling has an awesome way to change your perspective on the world. And it's really helped me being a part of a Canadian company like TC Energy. Just within North America, seeing the cultural differences across people that, I always think of Calgary as kind of the Denver of Canada. Well, it's kind of like a mix of Denver and Houston. It's got the Houston energy culture in the Denver atmosphere. But I've always just been fascinated with how cultural differences vary from country to country. And I think it's a great growth opportunity for leaders when they're trying to be emotionally intelligent and trying to understand how people tick, to go get experience in other countries and other cultures, and really broaden their horizons with the variety of how different people tick. All right, John, I'm curious.
I'd agree with sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, man. I think we have a little bit of a lag.
It says internet connection unstable. Oh, it's gone now. Okay.
Okay, cool. I was going to ask you, since McDonald, what's the heritage of McDonald, the McDonald name? And obviously you're a tall white male, very similar to me, and there's certain advantages of being tall. So what's the McDonald heritage, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of being tall?
Well, the background is my grandfather had a lot of heritage from Scotland, in his family tree, but there was also a lot of mix from from French blood and, various European blood. My mother's side is completely Czech. So back when it was Czechoslovakia, we had immigrants that came over to Canada. But what's also interesting is, I'm considered Métis within Canada. So I also have some Cree blood in my family tree. So I'm actually considered a somewhat of Aboriginal status within Canada. So I've got a little bit of mix of everything, but predominantly, roots from Europe and immigrant families. But the McDonald name, strong Scottish name. My grandfather, he was actually 5'1", very short man, but boy did he pack a punch in terms of his personality. As my mom would put it, he's got personality plus. He didn't let anyone pull a fast one on him, and he's got that Scottish vigor.
Has anybody ever told you that you look like Sean Bean or Liam Neeson?
No, I haven't.
I think you're a mix of Sean Bean and Liam Neeson, and it just hit me. So I had to look up Sean Bean's name though. I couldn't remember his name.
Action movie star that'll track down everyone that crosses his path.
Or a Jedi Knight.
Yeah, that's right.
For sure. So being tall, what are the advantages and disadvantages of being tall?
Disadvantages first and foremost. I look over my dinner table right now. I'm looking at the refrigerator we have. Bending over to just figure out if we've got milk in the fridge is a daily challenge. But being tall, I think there's a lot of people that see being tall as a bit of an advantage. I guess I wouldn't know otherwise. Having a different height. I think I like the fact that I guess I can see over people's shoulders if crowd. I think that the other challenge is actually finding shirts that fit lengthwise. So
that is a disadvantage.
I got my sleeves rolled up right now. It can be a huge challenge. But yeah,
man. So travel back when we could travel before COVID, getting on planes can be tough depending on the plane. That's one disadvantage to being tall. Shopping, definitely finding clothes that fit, it can be challenging. Luckily I'm at like the peak of normal people clothes and don't have to like special order everything. But I can't imagine some of these really tall guys that have to like special order all their clothes. It's just, that'd be crazy. But let's talk about some leadership phrases. And well, I guess before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about the 5 dysfunctions of a team, because that's something we've discussed many times. And I think we both read that through training at TC perhaps, or just in our personal growth. Share your thoughts at a high level on Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team and how that's been meaningful to you in your leadership.
Yeah, sure. The 5 dysfunctions of a team was actually introduced to a team build that we had earlier this year. Might have been actually late last year. And the thing that really resonated with me the most, was around being vulnerable and establishing trust. That's the pillar that everything is built upon. In Patrick's model for a high performing team. If you don't trust each other, you're not going to be able to, establish good lines of communication where you can actually take constructive feedback or give constructive feedback without worrying about the implications of, the things that you're saying to try and solve a problem. And that barrier around conflict will hinder our ability to actually establish a commitment from people and, you know, hold accountability to whatever we're going to agree upon. So, you know, the foundation, I think, is the hardest piece to really tackle, especially when you come into a team where there's baggage or personal baggage between people, and being vulnerable is challenging. I'll give you an example of you know, one really great leader that I recently saw in the organization in this whole COVID situation. She shared the fact that, you know, shared her personal life around you know, the challenges she was having at home. She said, you know, we're having scraps with siblings. We're having having scraps with my husband. You know, people are getting on each other's nerves in the house, and you know, it's stressful and it's hard. You know, we're all stuck in one house together. She shared this with multiple people within the organization, and you know, this is a leader within our organization that was being vulnerable and communicating to people that it's okay to have struggles right now, and it's okay to talk about it. And you know, I think that really opened up the door for people being more open with what's happening at home. We're in a work from home situation right now. People are juggling kids. People are juggling challenges with their parents if, you know, they're isolated. So there's a lot of stress going on, and we're still trying to continue, you know, what we're doing in our business environment. And then, you know, it took that leader to be vulnerable to really break down barriers for people, and make it okay to talk about, you know, the challenges that you're facing. So, you know, that's a long-winded way of me saying that, you know, we need leaders to be vulnerable and be willing to share parts of their personal thoughts with others, so that they can be vulnerable as well, and you know, that'll establish trust. And so, you know, I actually thank people when they are vulnerable, because in many cases it takes a lot of courage to do something that you usually wouldn't do, and that helps establish trust.
You are so right on with this, John. I could not be prouder of the way our leadership at TC Energy has handled this pandemic. I think there's many instances, not only the individual you were speaking of, but in other parts of the different business units that have shown some terrific leadership and vulnerability during this time. And when I think about being vulnerable, one way that I've kind of framed it in my head is that you don't necessarily earn trust. In my mind, trust is freely given, and you can prove untrustworthy and break people's trust. But leaders really, if they want their people to trust them, they need to give trust first, and really take the lead on giving trust. Being vulnerable, I think that's what that is. It's being vulnerable and putting faith in your people to appreciate your leadership and follow you. And I think you absolutely nailed that, John. You're right on about the vulnerability piece for sure. Anything on leadership that we haven't covered, John, that has been really impactful to you that you would want to share with the world here today? Sure.
One thing that actually got two pieces that I want to share. One was, you know, I had a mentorship coach in university when I was part of an engineering student society at the University of Calgary. I was a president, you know, the year before I graduated, and that was a team that I led. But in that leadership training, he actually handed a book to me. You might have heard of it, The 5 Love Languages, and it talks about people's preferences around, you know, communication, or, you know, feeling wanted, and you know, there's things like touch, There's things like, you know, admiration. I forget all of them, but you know, people actually react to different senses and different approaches than what you actually prefer as an individual. So that 5 love languages book really opened up my eyes, not just about, you know, relationships that you have with a potential spouse or your spouse, but actually relationships with everyone, because everyone has different perspectives and different, how shall I say, preferences in the way that they're communicated with. Some people react to physical touch. Like some people would say, I'd rather get a pat on the back than, you know, an attaboy in an email. And to actually understand that with people that you're working with is so important when you're establishing, you know, meaningful relationships with people. You got to know what resonates with them, and also you got to know what ticks them off, so that you're not actually you know creating conflict. So I think that's one aspect that good leaders need to strive for, is understanding how the perspectives of other people are in many cases completely different than your own worldview. And so, you know, I'd suggest to people to maybe read that 5 love languages, and, you know, maybe filter out the relationship aspects, and then apply it to, you know, your relationships that with people that you have in your work, or in your family life, or just in general.
You are so right on with that. And Gary V, I don't know if you listen to Gary. He's pretty popular these days. Mixed reviews on him, but I like a lot of his stuff. And one of the things he talks about is leaders just asking their people, what is it that's going to motivate you? And I don't know many leaders that take the time to sit down and really do what you just described, and ask their people, like, how do they want to be communicated with, and how do they, you know, want to receive praise, and what type of feedback are they looking for? And, you know, I think that's such a effective way to just open up, be vulnerable, and be willing to sacrifice and say, it's not about the way Phil wants it done. It's not about saying what Phil wants to say. It's about communicating the message in a way that the people you're communicating to are going to receive it and hear it. And, you know, I think that's just so wise, John. I think you nailed that for sure. You said there was another one you wanted to share?
Yeah, there's another book that I've been reading, and it's really focused around you know, knowing your why, and, you know, why you're doing things. And, you know, when you're trying to communicate something to folks, and you actually don't know your quote unquote elevator speech, or your why statement as to why you want to actually execute something, it can be hard to win the hearts and minds of people for what your why is. And in some cases, you may not be able to actually articulate your why, and it actually has to be through a symbol, or, you know, really understanding your audience and knowing what they need. And innately, it ends up being something symbolic that you really use to further a certain cause. So one example that I was thinking about last night before we got into the podcast is, what's something that I've been involved with where, you know, I'm really proud of, you know, the legacy that I left behind. You know, one thing that really, you know, excites me in terms of getting involved with various leadership roles is, what is the legacy I want to leave behind, and how am I going to leave a place better than what I found it? So I mentioned that I was the Engineering Student Society president back in university, and this was a really great development opportunity. You know, I was just starting out in you know, trying to hone my interpersonal skills with people, and this is just a wonderful opportunity to develop interpersonal relationships with people, figure out how people tick, figure out how to work an organizational structure, And it, and when you're volunteering, there really isn't too much risk involved with trying new things out. If I tried something really risky in my current role and fail miserably, that doesn't work too well from a career standpoint. But when you're in a volunteer position, you get to try, new things and be a little bit more risky. So one thing I go back to is I recognize that, there was a huge component of engineering. And I don't know how it is done in the States, but in engineering schools, there was a lot of pride around being an engineer. And, historically there was a lot of partying and a lot of, antics that you'd see from engineers. And as I went into university, I started to observe a trend, where there was a lot less antics and a lot less partying and a lot more focus on academics and getting involved in doing volunteering and, having a lot of development on, the interpersonal side. At the time I was at university, I was seeing this transition where there's a lot of people, that were in the partying and antics phase, but they were saying, we're starting to see this die off, and it feels like our engineering culture is just disappearing in front of us. And I went back and thought to myself, they feel like they're losing a sense of community. Just observing in general that they feel like they're losing a sense of community. But there's so many people that are passionate about, developing their interpersonal skills and volunteering and giving back to the community. And, what can we do to sustain this holistic sense of community within the engineering school? And I don't know if you've observed some of the various engineering schools in Canada, but they have a lot of different traditions. Like in Queens out east, they've got purple jackets that are originally yellow, and they dye them purple, and they kick these things home in their frosh week, and there's all sorts of things. But
I've never heard of that.
But anyways, there's all these special
awesome.
symbols for these engineers that they
Sure.
wear these coats everywhere, and it's a symbol of a community that they belong to. We didn't have any symbol at the University of Calgary, and I recognized that we needed something, and I talked to a gal that was on the committee or on the Engineering Student Society Council as well, and we were saying, well, could we wear cowboy hats because we're from Calgary? We got the Calgary Stampede. Would everyone wear that? Not everyone wears cowboy hats in Calgary, but we said, it's cold here, and what would be something that both guys and gals would wear? So we said, maybe we'll make an engineering scarf. And this is something that'll be loud, and people will identify us as engineers. And it had a lot of pushback. People were like, "There's no way that's gonna stick." So here, I ended up convincing the faculty that this is something that would promote our university culture. So we had the University of Calgary and Schulich School of Engineering put on one end of the scarf, and then the logo for our Engineering Student Society. And I said, if you stop spending money on all of these trinkets for all the frosh students, and you actually start handing out these scarves and welcome them into the engineering community, and say, if there's volunteering opportunities that you guys pursue, you can get badges, or badges of honor around what you've contributed back to the community. And so it was an idea. We had a scarfing ceremony where we gave it to all the new engineers that came into the university, and it was a great success. Last night when I was on LinkedIn, I saw the Chemical Engineering Student Society, pictures of young 20-year-olds, really in people wearing this exact same scarf. And that's well over 10 years ago. I think it was about 10 years ago we started that tradition, and there's that
Awesome,
sense
man.
of community that is still there. So I think I think leaders need to understand, what's potentially lacking, that, there's a gap, and is there a creative way to actually, fill that void? And that's one thing that I point back to is, what is a symbol that everyone will believe in, and will follow? What's concrete, and really exemplifies our why. So why do we have a scarf? It's because we believe in the community that we have at the Schulich School of Engineering, and everyone that isn't an engineer knows exactly what it is. So yeah, that was a little story I wanted to share.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. My younger brother's at Texas A&M. He's an Aggie. He just got his Aggie ring, and everybody down here knows if you're not an Aggie, we all think the Aggies are annoying. But if you are an Aggie, then I mean, there's no denying how cool the Aggie culture is and how strong their community is. And that ring is such a big thing for them to get their Aggie ring, and I'm so proud of James for getting it. But it's super cool what you did to create that, and that sense of pride and ownership. And I think it's it's not about the scarf, like you said. It's about the why. It's about, this represents that purpose, that those values. And I think TC Energy, for one's been really good at that. I think their values are strong, and especially their safety culture is just absolutely incredible. And some of these things start off, they're a little clunky, and I remember coming to TC, and safety was always important for sure, but seeing how we've grown and our safety culture has grown, and they've really ingrained those values in their culture, I think they've done a tremendous job. And kudos to you for your scarf, man. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and you're completely right. Our company why is, we're there to provide, to deliver energy to people every day, and every individual that's part of our organization contributes to that end. Whether it's from an engineering perspective, where we're taking a look at making the most reliable pipelines and safe pipelines as possible, or the folks on the commercial side, making sure that we've got capital to raise to make sure that we're continuing to grow and provide additional capacity for future customers. It's all interconnected, and you need to have that foundational why, and a rallying cry to get people to unite to a common cause.
All right, we're going to do rapid fire. I'm going to give you a popular phrase that is potentially associated with leadership or growth or networking or whatever, and I want to hear your opinions on these. It's all about who you know.
My opinion on it's all about who you know.
Mm-hmm. Have you heard that before?
I have heard about it before, and it's got a negative connotation. So I almost immediately think about old boys club. It's some sort of secret password, and once you're in, you're in. One sentiment is, I think that's a little bit cynical. I think maybe it's from the outside looking in. I'd encourage people that maybe use that terminology as, maybe why are these people communicating with each other so much? Are they vulnerable? Are they interested in the same things? Inherently we are creatures that need to have interactions. We're seeing that right now in this whole COVID situation. People are getting stir crazy because they're not getting social interaction. So, if you feel like you're on the outside looking in, maybe look at yourself inside and say, is there a way I can open up some opportunities to talk to people and see how they tick?
Man, you were right on that. That's so important, to look at yourself. And Jordan Peterson talks about this, another Canadian. I don't know if he's a friend of yours or not, but I like some of Jordan's stuff. But he talks about, fix yourself. And, I think that's great. I also think too, it's not all about who you know; it's about who knows you and what they think of you. So I think reputation is everything. And all right, believe in yourself.
Believe in yourself. Firm believer in that. You know, if you let yourself get scared by your shadow, or you know, you don't do things that scare you, you're not going to see growth. So I shared with you before this podcast. I've never been on a video interview podcast, and you asked me, John, you want to do this? And I said, yes. And then I think you said, I sensed some hesitation there. I said, yes, I'll do it because it scares me. So, you know, you do need to believe in yourself that you're going to be able to grow. And without, you know, facing adversity or struggles, there is no room for growth.
Look at you being vulnerable. I like it. I like it. We already covered trust. Hard work pays off.
Totally. Nothing is earned in this world without good hard work. And if people are getting it for free, I'd be curious as to how they were, you know, shiftily, you know, getting that. Anyways, I think hard work pays off. Like the fact that we are working hard at TC Energy, or anyone that's providing for their family, there's a means to an end. And you know, hard work develops virtue in all aspects. And you know, gold is refined in a fire, and you got to work at making yourself better. We're talking about leadership development here. There's pain in personal growth. You have to stretch yourself. Hard work does pay off in aspects of personal growth.
Yeah, I totally agree. I would say you got to work hard at the right things, though. That would be my one caveat. John, you've been a fantastic guest. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Final thoughts, and where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
Thanks, Phil. This has been a really awesome experience. It's gone by so quick. Final thoughts. I love your sentiment of go lead everything. It's not just saying go lead specifically in your area of influence at work. It's go lead everything. If you want to go find some volunteering opportunities and impact people in your own communities, go for it. You know, if you don't have time to get out and volunteer, and you're really hammered at work, you've got a family, work on being a good leader for your family. You know, I don't think I've met any man or any woman that can say our family's perfect. But you look inside yourself, and you know, there's always room for growth. If you can, as to where to find me, not a big social media guy other than going on LinkedIn. So if you wanna hit me up on LinkedIn, you can search up John McDonald, TC Energy.
Awesome, John. Well, thanks for coming on, and you stay true, keep going and leading everything, my friend. And we'll see you at the next TC meeting, or whenever we set up another virtual coffee.
Awesome. Thanks,
See you, man.
Phil. Have a good one.